Let's start with a half butterfly. Right leg is out straight, left foot to the inside of the thigh. And then we come forward and down, very relaxed. So I really want to emphasize that. We don't want to be yanking and pulling. So nice and relaxed, letting gravity take over. And if you need some support, if this is a little too intense, and it might be, blocks under your forearms, your forehead. We'll add some support, block under your left knee. Okay. And then on the other hand, if you're like way up here like this is as far as you go, you might try sitting on a block, and that'll lift your pelvis. It will change the angle. And so that'll have you tilting forward a little bit more, which may be desirable. If you're really, really tight in this area, that can give you a little more intensity, especially if you're this. Okay, I can't see you guys on the other end there. So if you're like this is your forward fold. You can't come any further than that. One of the worst things you can do, in my opinion, in my experience, is this. Okay, trying to yank and pull yourself down. I know it might feel really good, right? It might be really intense back here, and you think, oh, you know, I don't have time for this yin relaxed stretching BS. I need to like yank myself down. What's likely happening there, and which you may not be aware of, is it's actually stressing your spine, not necessarily this. And overstressing the joints here is not a good idea. So again, this comes from years of teaching and experience and education. I'm saying it for your benefit. You know, this is for you. And I say this because I teach live, right? I teach in person. I see people in classes all the time. And it's usually this person. It's usually a guy. It's usually a man. I'm not going to say it's always a man, but to generalize, it's usually a man. He's usually very stiff. And his attitude is, you know, I don't wait for it. I take it. I go for it. I'm not going to, you know, sit here and just let gravity do it for me. I'm going to grab my foot. I'm going to yank myself down. Oh, yeah, that's good. I can take it. I'm fine. I don't know what he's talking about. Yeah, you're fine right now. But what you're doing is you're developing a bad habit. And over time, that can damage the back of the spine. Okay? So if you're really not getting a stretch, instead of ignoring me and just doing this, and this is one of the reasons I talked to you at the beginning of class, you know, is anyone having an issue? Is there any problems? Because, for instance, one of the things of if you're not getting a stretch, instead of doing this, talk to me. Because there are other ways we can modify the stretch, modify the posture, okay? So just want to make that very, very clear. Try and relax into it. Let this stretch just unfold. Use support if you need it, okay? We're at about the 3-minute mark, so we've got about 2 more minutes here, which is fairly common for yin. So if you're new to yin yoga, this might feel like a very long time. And compared to other styles of yoga, it is. But in yin yoga, 5 minutes is what I like to call the gold standard. Above that, and you start running you run into an increasing risk of overdoing it and hurting yourself, which you can do with any kind of exercise or yoga. Less than that, you're getting benefits. I think you even start getting benefits, you know, at a minute or even 30 seconds. But there are certain benefits that don't kick in till about the 4-minute mark. So while you're still getting benefit, you're maybe not getting all the benefits that you could from that particular stretch. So this is why the 5-minute mark tends to be the gold standard. We have practices where it's less than that, and again, we're still getting benefit. So it's not like it's useless, but in, you might say, a perfect world, we would always do, you know, every one of these hip stretches for 5 minutes. Shoulders are different. Shoulders are different. So you don't necessarily want to stress the shoulder joint for 5 minutes, but hips, they can take it, and 5 minutes is a really good kind of mark to hit, if you will. All right, we're almost there. Let's go ahead and switch sides. Okay, so this is the half butterfly. And if you guys have any questions or concerns as we go, just put them in the chat, and I'll try and check the chat from time to time. Otherwise, again, there's really not much to do. Just let gravity and time work on your body. Gravity and time are so powerful. I mean, I look in the mirror and I see my face and I see all the gray and the aging, right? That's time. It's changing my body. It's changing my physiology, right? And gravity, I mean, look at what gravity does. So powerful. So we're harnessing these things in our practice. So unlike many other yin or yoga practices where it's sort of about how much effort can I make, what can I do, yin is really not like that. Yin is really how much can I let gravity and time do, you might say. So yin, a lot of times it's about stepping back, getting out of the way, because there's so much benefit that time and gravity can give us if we just hold the shape. And again, we want to avoid that temptation to do more, right? Well, time and gravity are great, but I'm going to help them out, like especially in these forward folds. So those of you who've practiced with me for a while know, like, there's certain postures that do require a lot of effort, even in yin yoga. So I'm not saying there's no place for that, okay? But what I love about Taoist teaching, which has very much influenced yin yoga, is the Taoists really emphasize there's a time and a place for everything. For everything. So, again, there will be times when we are going to need to make an effort. If we have in our head, oh, I can never make an effort, making an effort is bad, that's not right. That's not right, and that's not what I'm saying. But on the other hand, many of us, especially in the West, we come with the attitude that the more effort I make, the better. The more effort, the better the results. And this is just a general thing we have in our culture. Very few people talk about balance. In the world I live in, lots of people talk about balance, but I'm a yoga teacher. In the world at large, generally, it's just thought more is better. And I'll give you an example that probably all of you believe. More money is better, right? More money is better. More money in the bank, bigger paycheck, that's just going to be better, right? More money, it's better. How could it not be better? Well, I think at one point, hopefully, it's certainly not true in my view. I'm not saying I couldn't use more money. Again, it's a case-by-case basis, right? So for some people, yes, that might be a true statement. More money will be better for some people in certain circumstances. But I'm definitely not convinced that more money is always better. And I have a feeling at one point, maybe, if we make it as a species, as human beings, one day we might look back at the way we treat money in our culture and the billionaires and the millionaires and the way that money is distributed in our culture. We might look back, we might say, that wasn't such a hot idea, wasn't such a great idea. That just more and more and more money, more and more and more wealth, more and more and more affluence, that is always better. So that's just an example of an assumption that many of us have. And again, it might be an assumption that you have. And again, it may be true in your case. Could be the case that you do need more money. But you might consider maybe you have the right amount of money. Maybe you have exactly the right amount of money that you're supposed to have. Maybe you have enough money. And so again, these are very often unconscious things that just sort of run in our mind. More money. I need more money. I need more money. More money is going to make me happy. More money is going to free me. More money is going to allow me to do what I want to do. But in yoga and in spirituality, we want to start to question those assumptions. Is that really true? And I think if you're really honest, in some instances, you're going to find it's not true. Again, it's a case-by-case basis. And I'm not saying money is evil or bad. So please don't take what I'm saying that way. I'm not saying millionaires or billionaires are bad. Okay, I'm not saying any of those things. I'm just saying we want to question the thought. More money is always better. Okay, let's go ahead and come on out of that. Actually, that wasn't even my point, really. I was just using money as an example of the more is better attitude. So this shows up often in our practices, right? In our yoga, more flexibility is better. I know teachers and students who think that. They just assume that, well, go a little further, go a little deeper. Let me see if I can give you an assist. Oh, now you can grab your foot. Oh, that's good. Oh, now you can bind in that posture if I push your shoulders. So again, what sort of message is being sent there when that's happening? You know, more flexibility is better. At least that's one interpretation of what's happening there. So it's not, again, about money or capitalism or, you know, it happens in yoga. I think it happens everywhere. It's just a human thing. We often assume if this is good, more is better. And so what I love, again, about the Taoists is they're going to say, no, balance, balance, balance. So maybe it's that way with money, too. Yes, if you're completely broke, more is better. But maybe there's a point at which it's like, that's good, that's enough. All right, let's bring our legs in, give them a little squeeze. And the other thing I'll say is maybe that point is lower than you think. Maybe it's at a point at which our sort of egoic desires are not met, and maybe that's okay. All right, let's slide our hands under the hips, legs up, lift the head and neck, take a deep breath, exhale, lower the legs, and then we inhale up and exhale up to seated. Okay, so continuing on, I'm going to do the kickstand here. So you might want to move to the left edge of your mat. Right leg goes straight out, and we're looking for a stretch right in here in the inside of the thigh. Okay, those are your adductors. And you can play around with which way your foot points, whether it flexes, okay, or not. Left foot, that can flex or point. You could pull it in close to your buttocks. You could have it back behind your left knee. You can sink your hips back, okay. You can also keep them over the knee. It's really up to you. So again, try and find a nice balance where you're getting a stretch, but you feel safe. And you feel comfortable enough to hold the stretch. Again, the time and the gravity are really, really important here. So this is a great place to look for more is better thinking. So again, can I get a stretch here? It doesn't have to be super intense, because if it's too intense, I might have to come out of the pose partway through. Okay. On the other hand, if I don't feel anything, you know, I make myself super comfy, very relaxed, but I don't feel any stretch, then I'm not getting the benefit. And this is one of the reasons why I still enjoy teaching postural yoga after all these years. I've been doing this for a long, long time, is I find the lessons that can be learned doing postural yoga apply in our lives just across the board if we're willing to look and listen and learn. So many people see postural yoga as essentially like exercise. They just sort of think, you know, well, put your body in this position, put your body in that position, do this, do that. And there's a lot of benefit that comes from that. So I'm not saying that that's useless or that's even wrong. But what I find is that if we're willing to slow down and really look at what we're doing, there's a lot of psychology that comes into even just putting your body into a yoga posture, right? So how do I do that? What am I intending to get from this? How far do I push myself or not push myself? So some of you have heard me speak in the past about what my teacher affectionately calls black knights and panda bears. And again, none of these things are meant to make anyone feel bad. So as I talk about this, please notice if you feel insulted or like somehow you're being made to feel shamed or guilty. That's not the intention. It's just sort of meant to be a fun, playful way of discussing our tendencies, and we all have them. We're all human beings. We all have these tendencies. And what this work and teaching does is it tries to help us spot these things for our benefit, not to make us feel guilty or bad or ashamed, right? So basically, a black knight is someone who tries to always push further, do more. And very often there's a sort of seeking energy in this. There's a sort of like, if I do enough, you know, what? Then I'm going to get approval. Then I'm going to get love. Then I'm going to be free of pain. Then I'm going to be whatever. I'm going to impress other people. I'm going to feel amazing. Whatever it is, there's usually this idea that if I just push hard enough at something, I'm going to get some kind of reward. Okay, that's usually at least part of what drives a black knight. On the other hand, there is what we affectionately call panda bears, and they sort of have the opposite tendency. And I'm not saying you can only be one or the other. You might find you're one in certain circumstances, and you're actually, you're a black knight in certain circumstances, and you're a panda bear in others. But the panda bear basically is saying, no, I don't like that. I want to get away from that. And so they will, anything that feels uncomfortable, difficult, scary, uncertain, they try and push that away. Now, ironically, the black knight and the panda bear are ultimately kind of the same, because often black knights are actually doing what they're doing to try and escape something that's very uncomfortable. So ultimately, it's kind of the same thing, just a very different way of approaching it. I don't like this, and so either I run away from it, or I do something to kind of overcome it or overpower it. And again, this is almost always unconscious. So many people won't recognize whether they're a black knight or a panda bear, and that's fine. But eventually, one day, you might sort of notice that tendency in yourself. All right, let's go ahead and switch sides here. Take your time. So the panda bear's tendency when doing yin yoga is to do too little, to turn yin into it's another style of yoga called restorative yoga, which is very beneficial, but it has a slightly different intention behind it, okay? So again, there's a sort of distortion in what we're trying to do with this practice. And again, if you want to practice restorative yoga, by all means, do that. That could be exactly what you need. Maybe you don't need yin yoga. But then what I would do is just go to a restorative class, see a restorative teacher. They're going to be able to guide you into that intention much more skillfully than trying to take a yin class and turn it into a restorative class. I hope that that's clear. That's a little bit like, I don't know, going to a punk rock concert and then saying, well, they should be playing jazz, and taking away their electric guitars and giving them trumpets and saxophones and pianos and double basses and saying, why don't you guys play this instead? This would be much better. Well, it's like, well, why not just go to a jazz concert? So this is sort of what happens sometimes in yoga. And this is, again, what can happen when the panda bear is not seeing what they're doing and how they're trying to avoid the discomfort. These postures can be very uncomfortable. And it's, how can I say, there is a huge value and benefit in learning to allow and be present with discomfort. Life is uncomfortable. I hope that everyone taking this class has realized that to a greater or lesser degree. And we can try as much as we want to, as much as we can, to make it painless. But the interesting place we are in human history right now, especially in the West, especially in America, I think, is we're beginning to see how our attempts to reduce and eliminate our pain, our discomfort, to eliminate the things we don't want to do is actually making our suffering worse. So I hope everyone can appreciate that pain and suffering can be separate from one another. So I maybe can do something that takes away my pain, but actually creates more suffering in the long term. So a great example of this is an alcoholic or someone who abuses substances. Most people, I know that there's a lot of talk about genetics and all this kind of thing, but what we're learning with epigenetics is genetics are not genetics can't tell you what you're going to do. They can't make you do anything, okay? Genetics maybe make you predisposed to certain things, but genetics don't turn you into a drug addict or an alcoholic. It may mean you need to be super careful, but it's not going to turn you into that. So people become drug addicts and alcoholics, maybe because there's a tendency there, okay, but because something is driving them to that. They are, again, trying to self-medicate. They are trying to get away from something inside of them. And when they drink enough or they do the right kind of drugs, it quells or calms something and they can feel better temporarily. So again, pain is gone, but that habit of drinking too much, using substances, abusing substances, that's going to create and is creating suffering. So this is sort of where we are in human history, where we've come up with all these technologies and all these things to take away our discomfort, our inconvenience. Everything is getting easier. And yet we find things like depression, anxiety, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, you name it. Plenty of diseases on the rise, more and more diseases being created. So we can ask the question, is this really working? Our intention is to take away our pain, our suffering, but is it actually working? All right, let's go ahead and come on out of that. I recommend a child pose. So you can pull your knees together. All right, everyone. So let's take a little bit in the bear pose here, a little time here. Just stretch out, move around a bit. And then when you're done with that, you can tuck those toes. Pedal back and forth a few times. Get into your legs. And then we'll do the sleeping swan. So right knee toward right wrist, hips down and torso forward. Want to feel it right here. Okay, this knee can point straight ahead or angle. This right foot can be close to the hip or come up so the shin is parallel with the front edge of your mat. That foot can flex or point. Okay. And make sure this right knee is comfy. It's happy with what we're doing. The hips can rock to the left or to the right, and you can put a block underneath the hip here if you like. Okay. So it's very natural to want to avoid discomfort, to avoid pain, but the longer I study spirituality, and for me, you might say, first exposure to spirituality was the Buddhist teaching and the historical Buddha. I'm not a Buddhist, okay, so please don't think like I'm trying to convert you or proselytize. I'm just sharing what I think is a really wise teaching. And it's wise because I think it actually helps us reduce suffering. So unlike all our attempts to try and escape our pain, medicate it away, run away from it, the Buddha saw himself as almost like a doctor. He saw that humans suffered, and he went about trying to find the solution to suffering. He wanted to cure humans of suffering. And he meditated for many years and did yoga for many years, and eventually he came to what he felt was the answer. Before you think that, he was in a big rush to, convert anybody, he actually his first thought was, no one's going to understand. He was sort of like, yeah, this is, I found the answer, but I can't really teach it to anyone else. They're not going to understand. And then, there are myths that talk about how he was convinced to share. There are different myths or different ideas about that. But I think, whether those are true or not, I think the bottom line is, I think that that's a true part of the story, that Buddha probably at first hesitated. And I think he's right. A lot of people don't understand. So again, telling people that trying to avoid pain, trying to avoid feeling certain emotions, certain sensations, trying to avoid certain situations, these often actually make our suffering worse, not better. And so it's not about trying to seek out difficulty. It's not about trying to make your life difficult. You might say it's just going to be difficult. It's just part of the human condition. That's why one of the Buddha's tenets was all life is suffering. In a sense, he was trying to cut it off at the pass, if you will. He was trying to say, look, just get over that. Like it's going to be tough. But then, and there's a lot in Buddhism, so, I'm paraphrasing things here. This isn't a simple, quick, I can't summarize the whole teaching, in one or two sentences, but, in a very real sense, he was saying that, these very things that we're trying to run away from, these are actually doorways to liberation. The very things I'm trying to escape, not look at, run away from, avoid, these are things that actually can free us if we're willing to stop and look at them in the right way. And again, I find that this shows up even in our postural yoga, right? We can have postures we hate. We can have teachers we hate. We can have practices we hate. You know, people can get really, really upset about stuff. Likewise, they can get very addicting. So there might be classes that you almost have an addiction with, where it's like if you don't go to your yoga class, you feel out of sorts, you feel upset, you feel depressed, you are angry. And again, I'm talking from experience. This is not conjecture. This is real stuff that I've seen with real students. All right, let's switch sides. So addiction to spiritual states and spiritual practices is a very real thing. It's maybe not talked about enough. But what can happen is you start doing these practices and you start to feel better. And so then you replace the alcohol, the drugs, the binge watching, whatever it is, with maybe something that ultimately is better for you. You know, something that's it's an outside resource. It's something you're using to regulate yourself outside of yourself. Now, my feeling, and the feeling of at least some of my teachers, is that the ultimate goal is you don't need an outside resource to regulate. You're okay. You're okay. And you know how to be okay. So what that means is I don't need a bottle. I don't need a needle. I don't need a pill. I don't need a yoga class. I don't need a teacher. I don't need to meditate. I don't need anything to be okay. And for most people, that is a journey. It can take a lifetime to get there. And you don't want to pretend that you're there if you're not there. So again, with one of my teachers who's done a lot of work with drug addicts and alcoholics and recovery. In fact, he runs many, many recovery centers in California, helps people with this. One of the things they do is try and not shame people for using drugs and alcohol. There's a reason, again, there's a driver behind why they did that. It's not you're a bad person, right? So this is a very different way of looking at things, because normally if we're an alcoholic or we're a drug addict, we might feel like we're just bad people. And we might do some really awful things under the influence. A lot of people do. So it's not saying you're not, you haven't done some horrible things. It's not saying you shouldn't maybe apologize to certain people, but it's recognizing that there's a reason you did what you did. That you're just not a garbage person. And what they find is this is so healing for people to understand that, and then to begin to look at the drivers and to heal those drivers instead of simply shaming and guilting people into, being sober or being clean. Because again, if I take away the resource of alcohol, if I take away the resource of drugs, then I might move to binge eating, right? And then if I take that away, then I might return to, binge watching Netflix. If I take that away, then again, I might become sort of addicted to meditation. And again, not all of these methods that we use to self-regulate are equally harmful. So again, yoga is generally good for you. If you're going to pick an addiction, much better to pick yoga as an addiction. There's no question about it. Absolutely no question about it. But as long as it's an addiction, we're going to find there's a limit to its benefits. So again, this idea of learning to resource within ourselves alone. We don't need a practice. We don't need a teacher. We don't need alcohol. We don't need drugs. We don't need medicine. We don't need herbs. We don't need acupuncture. We don't need anything. And I'm talking on a kind of a deeper psychological level. You know, if we have bodies, and our bodies sometimes need some work. And I'm not suggesting to stop doing yoga either. But again, what is the driver? Is it just to keep us healthy and alert, or is there this sense of, I need something from this? This is going to give me something that, again, psychologically makes me feel okay. That's where we start to see that it's something else is driving there. Okay, let's go ahead and come on to our back. Now again, none of this is to make you feel guilty or bad. If you find yourself in these descriptions, if you're like, oh, I think I do that. Once again, this is not in any way intended to make you feel bad or guilty or even suggest that you should stop doing what you're doing. Again, if we need external resources to self-regulate, we want to acknowledge that. But there's a big difference when we acknowledge something consciously versus unconsciously. Right? When we really understand, okay, this is the way that it is, versus, you know, we're unaware of that. Okay, let's bring our legs in, give them a little squeeze, and shake it out. We're going to finish with a quad stretch here, okay? So let's hinge on up, and we'll fold the right foot back. Looking for a stretch here, the front of the thigh is your quads. So the toes can point back, they can point out to the side. You can pad with a blanket, right? The whole leg or just the ankle. You can roll it up, put it underneath the ankle. The knee can point straight ahead or out to the side. You could sit on a block if necessary. All right, and then from here we begin coming back if necessary to feel the stretch here. So you may not need that, you may need that, okay? We're looking for the stretch here, again, front of the thigh. Now this leg can be straight, it can be bent. You could drop it out to the side like that. And you could even reach up and pull it in for a more aggressive stretch. So that's really up to you. Again, I'll remind everybody that more is not necessarily better. So I'm feeling the stretch here, and that's plenty for me. Remember, you can put something behind you as well and lay on that. So like a bolster or a pillow or a block or something if you can't come quite all the way back. You can also stay up on your hands or elbows as well. So it's not an all or nothing. You don't have to be either sitting upright or all the way on your back. You can be at an angle. That's going to require more work, which goes back to my statement earlier in that, you know, not all yin postures can be done effortlessly, easily. Okay, sometimes they're going to require some work to be done properly. Okay, so right here, these are quads, hip flexors. We're stretching into that area. So it can be a really interesting question that we ask ourselves if we inquire, why do I avoid certain situations or certain things? Why do I seek out certain situations, certain things? What am I looking for? What am I trying to avoid, right? So let's say I don't like cocktail parties, and you know, I get invited to a cocktail party, and I either say no, or I go and I'm just miserable the whole time. So looking into that, like, what is the expectation there? What am I resisting at the cocktail party? And I'm not saying you need to go to cocktail parties or not. I'm just saying it's an interesting thing to examine, to look at. So is it, you know, social anxiety? Is it, you know, small talk? You just can't stand small talk. Is it, you know, you don't like how people are when they're drunk or drinking, or whatever it might be. It's just an interesting thing to examine or to look at. Why are we drawn to what we're drawn to? What are we expecting to get from that? What does that say about us, right? If I go to yoga, if I go on a yoga retreat, do I think that that makes me spiritual? What do I think I'm getting from doing that? A similar thing can be done with like posting on social media and things like that. Before I post, I ask myself, what am I getting from posting this? Right? What is my intention here? And what a lot of people say, well, I'm just sharing, Okay. But there can also be other things driving there as well. I'm sharing, and we just want to, again, this is just for us. It's not a judgment. It's not so we feel bad, but just, okay, I'm posting, but I'm hoping that people will like my post. I'm hoping to get, and it's, it's only human to a degree. But what happens if no one likes? What happens if actually people get angry, And that can be another one. Some people post stuff intentionally to try and get into a fight with people. They'll intentionally post provocative things, and they're hoping to get an argument with somebody. As strange as that sounds, that's can be the case. So again, none of this is so that we can feel bad about ourselves or judge others, even worse, I would say. But it's just awareness. And ultimately, that's really what, in my view anyway, if I were to really distill down what Buddha was trying to teach, I would say it really is about awareness. I actually think if you read Christian teaching in the right way, Jesus was also trying to teach the same thing. He went about it in a very different way. He lived in a very different culture and at a different time. But I think ultimately trying to teach about forgiveness and non-judgment, these also lead to awareness if you actually practice them, if they're actually a real practice of yours, and if you really understand what forgiveness is about. Let's switch sides. So from my view, awareness generally is a good thing. The more we're aware of why do we do what we do, why do we like what we like, what are we expecting when we're in a situation, when we go to a yoga class, right? What are we hoping to get from that? What are we expecting? What are we thinking is happening? What do we think that says about us? Again, because I've seen this as a yoga teacher, I've seen it many times. I've seen it even, decades ago at the Zen Center. I've seen people who would come into the Zen Center and they take the newcomers session, right? They're brand new to Zen and they do the newcomer session. And then you see them a few weeks or a few months later and their head is shaved and they're wearing all black. And, Buddhists have rosary beads that they wear. Zen Buddhists usually wear them around their wrist. And you see they have the beads and the wrist, and you can see how much self-identity is gone into being Zen and being a Zen practitioner. And ironically, it can go against the spirit of Zen. There's a Zen saying that says, if you see the Buddha on the road, kill him. And a lot of people will be, dumbfounded by that idea or that thought. But the idea is that the Buddha is not something outside of you. The Buddha is not something that you're supposed to respect or worship outside of you. What the Buddha represents is something inside of you. Again, some Christians get this as well, what's called Christ consciousness, you know, the Christ within, the birth of Christ in your heart. The way that I learn spirituality and understand it, this is saying almost exactly the same thing, just in a different cultural context at a different time to a different group of people. So when Christ lives within us, again, we don't have to resource outside of ourselves. When the Buddha is in us, not separate from us, when we are Buddha, you might say, then we're not looking for solutions outside to our psychological pain and suffering. And again, that's what Buddha was really talking about. You know, he wasn't on a mission to like feed everybody. In fact, him and his followers were beggars. They would go around ancient India, Nepal, and they would beg for their meals. That was very common at that time. That was a way for spiritual communities to exist. And it was considered good karma to give to these practitioners and support these practitioners and teachers like Buddha. So his solution to suffering wasn't, oh, we need to feed everybody, or we need to lift everyone out of poverty, or anything like that. He saw that these are maybe important things, but these are, you know, temporary fixes. You can be rich, and you can be well fed, and you can be bodily healthy, and you can still suffer. On the flip side, you can be on your deathbed, dying of cancer, and be free of suffering. This is the great insight. And this is what, to a degree at least, I've experienced in my own life. And others who I think have followed this have as well. So again, we don't need to shame ourselves or feel poorly if we need to resource externally. We try and choose the least harmful resource that we can, right? Whether that is heroin or alcohol or yoga class or meditation or going to a spiritual retreat, you know, whatever kind of keeps us together, whatever we need is okay, right? But the goal, the place we're driving toward, is where the resource is inside of us. We recognize that. And it's just a recognition. It's not that it ever was outside of you. It's always inside of you. But until we see it, we don't see it. And that's just the way it is. We won't see it until we see it. And that's just the way that it is. No teacher, no guru, no teaching, nothing is going to force you to see that. And in fact, you might be like, that's not true, and that's fine. Because I also can't force you to see it. All right, let's go ahead and come on out of that. Take your time. Just rest back, feel the rebound. My watch is broken, so I have to check the time on the phone these days. Oh, good. We're making good time. All right, when you're ready, bring those legs in. Give yourself a good shake out. And then as usual, I'll ask you and invite you to unwind onto your back. Nice comfortable position. In yin, we call that a pentacle. Okay, so just a comfortable position for the arms and legs. Close your eyes, still your body. And before you rest, set a timer on your phone for 6 minutes and just see if you can just allow yourself to be there. Again, even work, getting up to do work, getting up to take care of whatever it is, this can also be a way that we're avoiding feeling. So this is why I really try and encourage you guys at the end of class, See if you can just 6 minutes, that's all. It's a type of meditation, really. You lay down, you relax, and whatever thought, whatever emotion, whatever comes up, you just allow it to be there without actually doing anything about it. And this may not seem important or like it's doing anything, but it actually is. It's actually rewiring your brain. Every time you feel the impulse to get up, to go do something, to get a sip of water, to move, and you don't, it's actually rewiring your brain, okay? So see if you can give yourself that time. Just set the timer, close your eyes. Even if there's an itch or a scratch or your dog comes over, starts licking your face, try and avoid the temptation to pet the dog. Just relax, be still. Give yourself that gift. It may not feel like a gift. It might feel like a struggle. It might feel pointless. It might feel boring. These are true of almost every spiritual practice. See if you can just give yourself that time.